It is a contention of this model that there is a single law which can be expressed as a single equation, which governs the behaviour and movement of all matter, and which explains every physical phenomena which occurs in the universe, from the micro subatomic scale to the formation of the observable universe at the macro scale. And this law relates entirely to the one dimension of time. The model proposes that the electron orbital shell of hydrogen represents the means which enables consciousness as a dimensionless metaphysical aspect of our existence to be able to move in space and so experience a temporal existence in solid, three-dimensional physical reality. The electron orbital shell of hydrogen of itself is a dimensionless mathematical and geometrical construction, and as such is entirely notional and does not assume the pre-existence of an actual electron orbiting the nucleus at that shell. This model proposes that any given atom of neutral hydrogen comprises only two fundamental components, which together constitute the atom as being a single individual particle containing mass and inertial rest weight. One of the components is the nucleus X, and the other is the electron orbital valence shell, supposed circle, which we'll call Y, represents the electron orbital shell of neutral hydrogen. Of these two components, the nucleus exists only by virtue of the fact that it represents the geometrical centre focal point of the shell. In this scenario, the nucleus X represents nothing more than a geometrical dimensionless point in empty space, which of itself possesses zero mass and zero electric charge. In this proposed model, the interior of the atom can be described as a field of time which possesses the property of a variable viscosity, which can be compared to the variable density of matter. The degree by which the viscosity of the field of time varies is smooth and continuous, and is wholly determined by the length of the radius from X, the nucleus, with the viscosity or density of the field at the electron orbital shell being zero, whilst the viscosity or density of time at the nucleus always tending to infinity. The smooth and continuous field of time within the atom has an intrinsic geometrical structure, which is determined by the variable radial viscosity of the field. This geometry of the internal field determines the notional free-fall orbital velocity of time at any given arbitrary shell within the interior regions of the atom. Now, the rate at which a hypothetical clock ticks at any given radius, and therefore by association the orbital velocity of time, within the interior shells of the atom is determined by the viscosity of the field of time, which applies at that specific radius. The beginning of time at the static point X at the nucleus of the atom has a notional orbital velocity of zero. Since to all intents and purposes time has stopped at the nucleus, the concept of a clock, hypothetical or not, located at the dimensionless static point X at the nucleus, therefore has no meaning and makes no sense. as the viscosity of the shell decreases radially, so the orbital free fall velocity of time increases. At a specific radial distance from x, the orbital velocity of time equals 186,000 miles a second, and it is the value of this orbital velocity of time at this outer shell which determines the speed of light in a vacuum. So if we were to see the volume within shell Y here represents nothing more than a field of time, and this represents the viscosity here, where the viscosity at the X at the nucleus is a point of infinite viscosity, infinite density of time. And as the radius increases here, the viscosity decreases till it reaches the outer shell here, which has an orbital velocity. The orbital velocity here would be zero. Here would be zero. As you move out towards the shell, the viscosity decreases. The velocity, orbital velocity of time within the interior shell of the atom accelerates as the radius increases until the acceleration reaches a velocity of the speed of light at the electron orbital shell of neutral hydrogen. The value of this radius is a physical constant which is approximately equal to this number. At the microcosmic atomic scale, the radius represents the electron orbital shell of hydrogen. In this model of the atom, the electron shell represents the immediate present moment in time, whilst the interior region within the electron shell represents the past in relation to the time field which extends from the nucleus to the circumference. At the macrocosmic scale, and relative to the centre nucleus and the mass of the planet, the equivalent shell at which the viscosity of the time field of the planet is zero, and at which the orbital velocity of time equals the speed of light, resides at an altitude of 3,000 or so kilometres above the surface of the planet. From the perspective of and relative to any given point on the surface of this notional time shell, the centre nucleus of the planet X represents a static point in empty space. And this fact holds regardless of the fact that the centre nucleus of the planet is orbiting the Sun at 107,000 kilometres an hour. Now, all this stuff is not science fiction. It is a law of general relativity that a clock which is situated at the shell at this altitude of 3,000 kilometres will experience zero time dilation and will neither gain nor lose time relative to the field of gravity of the planet. The guys who launch satellites into orbit at NASA, and guys like Elon Musk, know all about this notional timeless shell which surrounds the planet. However, since there is no practical reason or anything to be gained in putting a satellite into orbit at this altitude, this shell appears to be of no significance to any current space programme. Having looked, I can find no reference to any name for this shell. As such, and until I'm informed otherwise, I refer to this shell from now on as the Carty shell. From the perspective of the dimensionless static point X at the nucleus of the planet. The surface of the shell at a constant radius of 9,000 or so kilometres from the centre also represents a static point in the dimension of time, or the dimension of time relative to the planet. A clock which is orbiting the planet at the Carty shell represents the zero time reference clock of the planet. A clock situated at any other altitude will either gain or lose time depending on its relationship with the real-time metronome clock of the planet, as represented by the altitude of the Carty shell. Now I'll discuss the further profound significance of the Carty shell shortly.